So what I'm gonna do is that I'm going to section this video into 3 main categories and basically show my whole process. So just ignore my pencil. It's a bit broken and a bit old, but it works just fine. So let's begin. So the first section of the video is going to be observing. Now this part is actually the simplest part out there because it doesn't need you to go out and draw things. All you need to do for this is just go on Pinterest, scroll a bit, and find some manga backgrounds that you like. And I did just that. I created a manga board called Manga Backgrounds, and I gathered a few references that I can use. What you need to do for this section is just basically open the page you want to observe and just look for the main components of that page. So let's take this page for example. The first thing you can tell is that it actually uses only one screen tone and blacks. It's like a mid-gray and then you have darks. Another thing that I can notice is that the line art is basically not so clean. It isn't attached with itself. For example, there's this person here and the artist just showed the silhouette of that person in the background and the silhouette of this person here. But the people here are a bit more clear and you can see some details in their hair, but not so much as well because the main focus is on the background. The tiles aren't so connected. Tiles here are just a few squares connected together, and even those squares aren't completely filled, like the lines aren't completely touching. The gray tones, the screen tones, are placed where the shadows are. It's not randomly placed. So for example, you're gonna have to pick out a light source, which I think it's basically on this part. And that light source is hitting and it's creating these shadows. Most likely the artist freehanded this background. The lines here are barely like parallel and you could easily use a ruler for this, but just the fact that they freehanded this part makes it a lot nicer to see and it has a lot of texture. You might want to also check for the brush they're kind of using. So for this, I don't really get what the brush they're using because when I try to zoom in, I can't really see much. It gets all blurry, but I think it's a slightly textured brush or maybe not so textured, but they kind of just completely went with the line art. They didn't use as much screen tones as some other artists use. For example, in this one here, they just did a few strokes just to indicate the material of the wood here. They didn't use much details for this lamp here. They just went with the overall shape of the background, and for the people, they just went with a few details and a few strokes, screen tones as well, just to indicate the light here. From these people, these two are probably the main characters. Why? Because they stand out the most. They don't have much details as these people in the foreground, because the closer to the camera that the people are, or the elements of the backgrounds are, then the most details you want to put into them. But probably like the main characters of this story, or really important characters, because they stand out. They have a dark color to them and they completely stand out from the rest of the people here. Overall, this background isn't as detailed when you zoom in, but it can clearly show everything it needs to convey. The artist was really conceptualizing the whole scene and just making it understandable, but not to a point where it will take them hours to finish. Another background that we're gonna pick is the one from the Chainsaw Man author, but this is not Chainsaw Man. The whole background is composed of like two screen tones, 2 gray tones and blacks. There's a gradient coming like darker here in the foreground and lighter further on the page. There's also darker gray tones here on the window to symbolize that there is nighttime. You can see a box. It doesn't have much texture to it. It's just a box. The lines aren't connected. This plush here is a bit shaded, so it's a bit more detailed. Here you can see like those lines just to kind of indicate the shadows. When you see this line here, it's not so straight. They probably didn't even use a ruler for this one. They went free-handed with it. I would say that some people, if this line was if there was light here, some artists would probably just darken the whole place up a bit more and maybe just make a light here, but they didn't, so they just went very loose with the screen tones. So overall, it's just a simple background with the usage of maybe two gray tones. I think they use the same gray tone here, a bit of a gradient from here to here, and just some clean lines. The brush they're using is probably not so textured. I think this background has a bit more details to it, but it might look like that. It really isn't the case. The flowers here are barely visible, like there's just a few lines indicating that there's flowers and maybe some leaves. It has a lot of scratching, which I think it's this artist's choice of style. The background gets less and less detailed. There's barely any details here, just a few lines indicating that there's probably doors. They didn't use gray tones as much. No, they actually didn't use gray tones at all. Like, the only thing they used is just blacks, and that's it. They completely relied on the brush for this one. The only thing they used is just hatching in one direction. I think the hatching is done compared to the movement of these two characters, because these two characters are moving this way and the hatching is done this way to kind of indicate like speed lines or something. I think the perspective is 3-point perspective, because this line goes down and maybe converges with this line here. These two lines converge with maybe here, and then you have other lines that go this way and they converge to a point there. So it's a 3-point perspective, and you can see some lines here to indicate the shadows. For the last background, I'm gonna take this picture, which is from a popular manga, which had Atelier, I think it's pronounced. I love the background of this. There's no screen tone usage in this one. In the place where screen tones used to be, they just use hatching, and the hatching is done in such a way that it doesn't, they don't need to be straight lines. They actually curve around the shape of the cloud and the shape of the mountain or the hills. Here it's just random, kind of to indicate a mountain, but it's barely like visible what's going on here, but it's so nicely done because when you zoom out, it's just mountains, that's all. These trees, they're just squiggly lines. They barely look like trees, but from afar they look so good. Like, this is clearly a tree from afar. When you zoom in, it's still a tree, but it's much better. Oh gosh, this looks so weird. Anyway, from really up close, this barely looks like, it still looks like a tree, but it's not so detailed. Or these ones here, like, it's just basically squiggly lines. They went like this with their brush. Here you can see that hatching is done in such a way to indicate there's grass. The most important detail in this picture is basically the castle. The castle isn't like too dark to contrast, but the fact that it's completely white, there's a line art, it completely contrasts with the background. But when you zoom in, like, the funny thing about it is that it barely has any details to it. You can see some hatching here to indicate that there's tiles, but on the front it's barely visible. Here the lines are completely squiggly. They don't go too straight, which I don't think is a real architecture. I think there's a huge door here, but I can't really make it out. But overall, when you zoom out, it's really good. When you zoom in, it's barely any details. I think this still takes a lot of time to make because the hatching is really detailed in its own, but if you wanted to go for a much simpler method, I think you could just use gray tones for here, like dark and then a bit of gray tones, and maybe just scoop out some gray tones over. And also here you can see the tiles that they just basically drew some here and didn't go on with it. Anyway, this took a lot longer than I was hoping for. Observing is actually the most important part. So you can do this part for as long as you want. It can be done on your phone, on your laptop, on your iPad. Just keep looking at some reference pictures and keep observing them, zooming in, figuring out what brush they use, what perspective they're using there, if they use gray tones or not. Just overall, that's the main point, main focus. And for the second part is going to be copying from references. Copying from references is actually a great way because it takes this part into a next step. You're basically zooming in as much as you can and copying every detail. Now, this is done for just basically learning purposes. You don't have to copy a reference and then post it on social media and just say it's yours. Don't do that. It's not ethical. So I did copy once from an artist. This isn't really a background, this is only a character, but back when I didn't used to be so good with characters and screen tones, I did a copy style. It was this one. I really love the style of it. Like, it has those hands that are dripping, and I really went into detail with this one, but didn't really copy one for one. I just kind of change the style a bit. I wasn't really good at the whole manga style before. This is only one character. You could do this for multiple characters or a background. I would suggest copying like 10 different backgrounds before getting to the third and last section of this video. And that section is actually the most important because this is what we're aiming for. That section is experimenting. Experimenting is when you have observed, when you have copied, when you've gotten a few things for your own style, and then you just want to draw the whole thing on your own. For experimenting, first of all, you need to have an idea, and you also need to have a setting and elements that you're gonna include in. For example, the idea I'm thinking it's gonna be a busy street, I guess. Setting, it's obviously gonna be city. Elements, I'm gonna include background characters, tiles, trees, ACs from outside, cars, which I'm really bad at, but I made a whole one-shot about cars, so hopefully I'm gonna improve in that sooner. But basically these. So I'm not gonna start completely from scratch because I actually do have an idea, I do have a setting, and I drew my background on paper. Here I'm gonna show you, this is my sketchbook, and this is the whole manga page I drew. So I really love these backgrounds, they barely took any time. I think the whole page took like 30 minutes. I'm gonna take this background here and I'm gonna redraw it on my iPad, and I'm gonna take everything I learned till this point and just put it into use. After 45 minutes on Ibis Paint, this is the background I ended up with. As you can see, it's not perfect, the perspective isn't really correct and the lines aren't straight. Also, the lines on the people are a bit wonky, but I think it looks great either way, and for the time it took, it really isn't all that bad. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and if you want to read my manga, you can go on my personal website, which is linked in bio.